Well, you want to hear my final word, Mr. Push Everyone Around Nacarelli? Maybe you can bully some of the chicks in this school, but this chick has been bullied by one Johnny Nacarelli for the last time.
I love my haters. They make me famous.
Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve. James Cameron's Avatar, The Way of Water, is a 5-star movie. If all you wanted to know is if I recommend it, yes, I do. Emphatically.
It's my favorite movie of all time.
Yeah, me too.
At the time of posting this review, I have seen the film twice. The first time was in IMAX 3D, which was absolutely wild. And then the second time was in Dolby Cinema. That's the version where the seats vibrate with the sounds of the movie.
That feels good.
I know that it's over 3 hours, but being visually and emotionally immersed in the world of Pandora, it doesn't feel like a chore to watch the film for that long. If anything, it's the opposite. I watch this movie, and I want to be in Pandora. I don't want to leave. There's a story floating around online, which is more like an overblown rumor, that James Cameron has handed in a 9-hour cut of Avatar 3, and he wants the VFX artists to do the effects for all 9 hours, and then he will start cutting it down. Even if that were to be true, I am telling you right now, James Cameron, that I would watch your 9-hour Avatar movie if you were to release that version on DVD. I said what I said. I will go to the store and buy my copy of it opening day.
With your gift and your talent and your vision, are you kidding?
The first part of this video will have minimal or mild spoilers, and then the second part will go into full spoilers because I want to geek out. Even one of my friends who is an Avatar stan hasn't seen the movie yet, and I gave them a stern talking to make them find time to see it this opening weekend instead of waiting till Monday or Tuesday, which apparently was their original plan.
Oh my god, corny.
I need people who have seen it to come geek out over the details with me, and then we can also speculate on the trajectory of what's coming in the story of the future films. But first, the minimal spoilers section. It should surprise absolutely no one that the visuals of this film are stunning. It's unbelievable to imagine going from this back to the gray sludge garbage that some franchises expect audiences to embrace, and for some reason a lot of people do. Ugh. Pandora is in a league of its own, and it's not even close. You should already know that if you've seen the first film, but it bears repeating since it's still exquisite to get to see this world again. In getting to revisit the characters we already know, I found that I actually like Jake Sully a lot more in this film than I did in the first one, because it's so much more fun to see him be a Na'vi full-time, and not only that, to see him be a father.
Daddy?
There are a lot of great characters with stories and arcs of their own that I got very emotionally invested in. Jake and Neytiri have children, some of which have very compelling journeys in this story. You follow them, you follow Jake Sully, you follow the villains, and you also get to experience a whole lot of wonderful world building to do with this new Sea Clan. Those are the turquoise people. If you've seen the trailer, you will know what I'm talking about. I love this Sea Clan because we have Cliff, Curtis, and Kate Winslet as the leaders of this group. With talent like that being hired for this film, you already know they're going to deliver exactly what needs to be delivered. One of the world-building details I love about this water tribe is that they are so clearly Polynesian, and Cliff Curtis is constantly being hired by Hollywood to play any and every non-white ethnicity and nationality and culture except for Polynesian, because let's be real, Hollywood is not very good at creating things with Polynesian lead characters. But I clocked it immediately. You could see that the markings of this water clan were modeled after the types of tattoos that you will see from traditional Polynesian designs. And I know that Polynesian is a broad descriptive term, but I'm personally not knowledgeable enough to differentiate between which designs are more or less associated with the many different types of Polynesian people. So I will leave that level of detail to be discussed by people who are qualified to do so. But if the tattoos weren't proof enough, you see this Sea Clan do that face that you'll often see Maori doing during a haka. If I'm not mistaken, it's supposed to be a way of intimidating your opponent. But if that's not actually accurate, any Polynesians watching, feel free to go right ahead and correct me. In general, I love how much time this film takes to flesh out the world building. If you saw the first film, you may remember how there was this long stretch of Jake Sully being taught about the Na'vi and more specifically about the Omaticaya. In Avatar: The Way of Water, we get to go on a similar journey to learn about exactly what's in the title, the Way of Water. It has no beginning and it has no end. And I love this for many reasons. Partially because it's part of what makes the experience feel so immersive, partially because an essential component of what makes the fantasy genre so much fun is the lore and the world building, but also because there is so much about what you learn during that portion of the film that are essential things to understand to explore the main characters of this ensemble and to build up the dramatic stakes of the big action sequence that happens at the end of the film. And when I say the end of the film, I mean that it probably lasts anywhere between 45 minutes and an hour. It's not just loud banging and crashing and clanging for that runtime. There is a range of dynamics. It's similar to listening to a classical symphony where you have some moments that are quiet and intimate and others that are explosive and bombastic, but all of it is beautiful. As always, like in the first film, there is this strong thematic messaging of anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism, and it's so refreshing because I strongly associate action blockbusters with propaganda. They all take that DoD money and they just put out whatever propaganda their Fed overlords tell them to.
Take it away before I gag.
But absolutely no one tells James Cameron what to do. James Cameron has said on the record that Terminator 2 is an anti-cop movie. That's why the T-1000 looks like LAPD. The first Avatar film really leaned into the way deforestation and excessive mining, things of that nature, are capitalist violence. I saw an interview from this new press tour floating around where James Cameron was talking about how most of the film's profits were from outside of North America.
I think it's important to remember that Avatar was created by somebody who was from Canada. It played very well in North America, but it made 3/4 of its revenue internationally in all other cultures, right? So it was touching people everywhere the same way, regardless of language or religion or any of those things.
A lot of people talk about that $2.7 billion box office during the initial release. It is now up to almost $3 billion since they have had a few re-releases over the years, including this year, which I went to and had the time of my life at. But what not as many people talk about is that global appeal and how so much of that profitability comes from outside the North American market. My opinion on that is because most countries in the world have had to suffer violence, of colonialism, of occupation, of having your natural resources stolen for the profits of Western corporations and oligarchs. So the story of the Na'vi that we see play out in the first film speaks to so many people in a way that these insufferable generic action blockbusters that are more typical of Hollywood's style of storytelling do not. I see it a lot online where people who live in North America or even in other Western countries with a long history of inflicting colonial imperialist violence to other countries or to their own indigenous populations, they perceive the Avatar story as mostly being about the pilgrims who came to North America and did their damage there. Let's have a brief history lesson. Operation Ajax was in Iran in the 1950s. The MI6 name for that operation was Operation Boot, but it was the same thing, and it was all done to steal oil. The 1973 coup that the US backed in Chile, you know what Chile has a lot of? Copper. The US backed another coup in a different country not that long ago over lithium. The country of Hawaii was illegally annexed and has been illegally occupied.
Oh, yes. I mean, our whole history, understanding what's happened to Hawaii, that we're actually occupied, that it's not an actual state, there's many things.
The country of Hawaii has loads of natural resources, and do not get me started on any and every country in Africa that has had its natural resources plundered, not only historically, but to this very day, by imperialist countries. So when people who lack this awareness of both history and current events, and how this type of imperialist violence is not a thing of the past, but an ongoing reality, then those people lack the perspective to understand why Avatar appeals to as many people as it does. It is not only about stunning visuals, though they are in fact stunning.
I've been a climate activist since high school. The film wouldn't have existed if I hadn't been, because the head head of 20th Century Fox said, well, I like the story. It's a good script. Can we get all this tree-hugging hippie bullshit out of it? And I said, actually, no, because the reason I want to make the film is exactly because of the tree-hugging, hippie, hairy-legged, Birkenstocks-wearing, bullshit. What happened after the film came out, indigenous leadership in various parts of the world approached me and said, your film is showing the type of thing that we're actually going through for real. And there was, sort of the unstated request was, how can you help us? How can you help get our real story out in front of people the way you did this fictional story? So yeah, then I went on a couple of years of actually becoming an overt activist and trying to help them, whether it was the Athabasca tar sands or down in Brazil with the Belo Monte Dam and all that. And eventually I realized, okay, I can just be another drive-by do-gooder, or I can go make more Avatar movies and reach a much wider audience, maybe with a somewhat diluted message because it's interwoven with entertainment, but maybe throw a much broader net. So that was the point at which I decided to go ahead and make more Avatar films, which was actually a difficult decision because I had a lot of things I was interested in terms of ocean conservation and sustainable agriculture, a lot of projects I was working on that I had to turn away from to go back into the saddle as a filmmaker. I almost bailed on being a filmmaker. And the thing that kept me in the game was the possibility of the Avatar universe reaching a lot of people with a persistent kind of emotional message and reaction on the part of the audience to maybe fight for and protect that which we're losing.
With Avatar: The Way of Water, the same themes are a central part of the narrative. This time we see the geographical location shift from being in a forest to a water-centric clan. They're on the coast, by the sea, but with all of the Eat the Rich stories that are resonating with audiences as much as they are nowadays, there is little reason why Avatar: The Way of Water won't continue to have a decent long run in cinemas. I don't normally like to get overly bogged down by discussing box office matters, but I will briefly touch on this aspect before we get into the fun part of this video, which is the spoilers.
I hate to break it to you, but I'm gonna.
James Cameron has had a tried and true method in place for decades now, where he likes to release his films in December because there are not as many films being released in January or perhaps even February that can compete. I talked about this recently in my Best Horror Films collaboration here on my channel with horror YouTuber Nick Says Boo. January is the graveyard of the year where studios tend to send things to die. It doesn't mean that there are never any hits in January, but overall, a lot of stuff the studio just wants to dump, that's where they will do it. James Cameron utilized this strategy for both Titanic and the first Avatar film, and both of those films went on to make monster profits, much of which were earned in the year after they were released. So for Titanic, much of the money was made in 1998, and for Avatar, much of the money was made in 2010. James Cameron knows how to create works of art that have legs. So I'm not at all worried. And these giant production costs people keep talking about are the combined costs of two films, because he filmed both Avatar 2 and Avatar 3 back to back. So the rough estimates you're seeing floating around and the numbers that need to be earned for it to be profitable are numbers that need to be achieved with the combined gross of both films, one of which has not even come out yet. Avatar is not going anywhere for a while. There won't be another big IP blockbuster coming out until late February of 2023. So, if you're one of those people who likes to treat the release of art like it's a sports match, there you have it. I have addressed the box office discourse. Now, let's move on to what I've been wanting to get to, which is the spoilers.
A few inches later.
I get super horny when I travel, and that's not my fault. That's science.
I thought long and hard about how I wanted to do this, and I decided I'm just going to go through a lot of what I took in my notes sequentially. The first time I watched the film, I took minimal notes because I was just so sucked into the viewing experience. It was so immersive that I just had to be in that moment and feel everything. If you're familiar with my channel, though, you know that I take a notebook and a pen when I go to the cinema if I'm going to watch something that I'm planning on reviewing for my channel. The second time, it was easier for me to actually take more notes. So let's just go through them together. If you're still here and you have not seen the film, I would recommend that you click off, go see the movie, treat yourself to the experience that is Avatar: The Way of Water, and then come back and finish my video. When we get reintroduced to the Sully family, and they established that Jake and Neytiri had children, and more specifically, they had 4 of them, I went, damn, that is a lot of children. One of those kids is definitely going to die before this movie is over. That's just too many for them all to survive when Uncle Sam is invading Pandora. Well, we all saw how that played out. It was very interesting how quickly it was established that Jake, as far as his parental style goes, is way too tough on his sons. On a first viewing, I could have initially chalked it up at the beginning of the film to them being the older children, which means they are more so on the cusp of having to join this fight against the colonial invaders of Pandora. But when you see the story progress further, that's when you start to realize that it's a toxic behavioral thing with a gendered bias. Even though Jake has renounced the human culture, his human body, you can see that there are certain habits he still has to break and things he has to unlearn. That line of, "Get that crap off your face," that's a line loaded with subtext. In the literal sense, it's him being dismissive of one of his sons not being good enough as a soldier, as a warrior. But thematically, it's clearly reminiscent of the type of toxic fathers who would definitely berate their sons if they were to be found wearing makeup. I don't have children, but if I did, any kid of any gender can wear makeup as long as they know how to do a double cleanse so you don't mess with the health of your skin by not effectively removing your makeup at the end of the day. Wash your face. But I love the time jump. I know some people complain about there being such a long time between the release of Avatar 1 and Avatar 2. I love that Jake Sully is no longer a bumbling 20-something-year-old. He is now...
Daddy?
You clearly see that this story is showing how fatherhood has fundamentally changed him. It's not just the maturation, but his approach to conflict has completely changed from how he was in the first film. And that's a central arc for him as a character and the story itself, where he now wants to run away from conflict because of fear. He fears for his family and thinks the solution is to run away instead of standing and fighting against the greatest threat that this planet has ever known. When the teenagers are back at the science base and they're asking who knocked her up when they're looking at Sigourney Weaver's avatar in the tank, I've been thinking about this a lot, and for now, until I can get more information or ponder it some more to come to a different conclusion, at this particular moment in time, my theory is that Jake is the father. I think the ancestral tree from the first film, the Sacred Tree of Souls, it had that first attempt to try to transfer Sigourney Weaver into her avatar permanently, but she was too injured, so she did not survive that operation. But then later, Jake successfully gets transferred from his human body into his avatar. Well, maybe there's something going on there, because why do the human scientists still possess her body? Did the tree transfer the DNA, or did a scientist harvest Jake's DNA from his human body? Or maybe did they already have his biological material on file because they probably had access to it in order to make the avatar for his twin to begin with? I don't think it's a traditional procreation, because Grace had already passed away. So that only leaves magical conception that involves the tree, or scientific conception by scientists who were experimenting and tinkering away in their labs. I know they were playing around with the idea that Norm could be the father, and I'm not saying that that's impossible, but Norm could also just be a red herring. If you have theories on who Kiri's father is, though, let me know, because I'm very curious about that. James is probably going to make us wait for years to get an answer, because unlike these mega corporations, he actually pays his VFX artists and has them take the correct amount of time to do their work well. That's why the movie looks as good as it does. By the way, if you haven't seen it, there's a video of VFX artists reacting to Avatar. It's the one where they're watching the Avatar: The Way of Water trailer, and their reaction is interesting, but the part that really stood out to me was where they were talking about how Weta had filed numerous new patents for VFX techniques that they innovated by working on this movie.
I don't even know how many patents they've been making, but I've seen little blurbs pop up of like, oh cool, Wade has got like 4 or 5 new like water simulation patents.
When they show the military base of the soldiers, you can so clearly see the stark contrast between the beauty of Pandora and the barren wasteland of the Imperial core doing what it has done over and over again. Did you know that the #1 source of pollution worldwide is the US military? And that's not me saying that. That's academic researchers. If you start following anti-imperialists on social media instead of professional film critics who do nothing but complain every time a legendary film director calls the MCU trash, you might learn some important truths about the environmental damage that has been caused all over the world by the military-industrial complex. And when Edie Falco, who I hated in this movie, not because she's a bad actress, she did a great job playing the character, but her character is evil. So every time she showed up, ooh, I was fuming. Her character said a line about how Earth has become uninhabitable or that the planet is dying. So her responsibility, their collective responsibility, is to tame this frontier. Ooh, my immediate reaction was, what in the manifest destiny is this genocidal bullshit I'm being forced to hear by this filthy war criminal? Let's give it up to Miss Edie Falco for doing her job and provoking such a strong reaction from me. We can start to talk a little bit about Spider now, although he's definitely going to pop up a fair few times in this video that I'm doing because his story is very eventful in the larger narrative. But I just want to say first, before we get into a lot of the specifics, that I've seen a lot of horrible things said online about his character. And although I have no problem with people being upset by some of the things that Spider does, I want to make it very clear here and now that I will not allow this space on my tiny, minuscule corner of the internet to turn into something where he and the actor who portrays him gets bullied and dogpiled on the way that Jake Lloyd, Ahmed Best, and Hayden Christensen were when the prequel trilogy came out. Knock it off. We're not doing that here. The general feedback I would give to summarize Spider's arc is that I got a very strong sense that a lot of seeds were being planted in his story that are going to expand in some very interesting and dramatic ways in future films. I'm really intrigued to see how the plan will fully play out. I don't want to get into all of that just yet, but there's clearly a lot of big things coming with Spider's story, and I could really feel that from what we saw happen with him in this movie. But on a brief, lighter note, Jake Sully said baby girl 3 times in this movie. 3 times.
You gotta put your fingers in the holes.
I saw a tweet saying that they never found Jake Sully attractive until he turned blue. And I partially agree, but I think Jake Sully didn't fully come into his hotness until he became a father. Now back to Spider. I find it very bizarre that people are getting as mad at him as they are when this is a child, a teenager, being taken hostage by genocidal war criminals, armed to the teeth, who, upon bringing him back to their base, proceeded to hook him up to a machine to torture him for information. This is a child. I saw that interrogation scene and my reaction was, what in the Guantanamo Bay is this? Reminder that Obama lied and claimed he would close Guantanamo Bay and he never did it. None of you would fare well under that type of treatment as adults, but a child managed to keep his mouth shut instead of ratting out his chosen family. Did Spider overshare about the Na'vi way of life to the soldiers? Yes. He was also being held hostage, and he did have his fair share of moments of fighting back. Again, I'm trying to go in sequential order, so let's jump back to the Sully family leaving the forest to go to the Sea Clan. Jake says, I'm done with war. And my reaction was, well, war is not done with you until you end it. That's really the crux of his story. That is what he has to learn. There's nothing inherently evil or malicious in Jake's push to run away from the violence. He's not some reckless jump before you think meathead like he might have been in his youth, the way we saw him in the first film. He's got his lady and he has his children. Regardless of his children training in different ways to learn how to fight, to hunt, to track, all of those things, they are not ready yet to be full-blown warriors. And he's scared. But the enemy they are up against is never going to stop. It doesn't matter where they run away to on Pandora, and it's a little baffling that he doesn't get that, but maybe he just was never high up enough in the corporate hierarchy of imperialism to understand that. And that's something he had to learn in this story. When we first meet the Sea Clan, that moment where Cliff Curtis and Kate Winslet exchange looks to decide whether or not to let the Sullys stay there, I loved that. It was giving me Zack Snyder's 300 when King Leonidas looked at his queen to get permission about whether or not to do violence against Xerxes' messenger. That stuff is delicious. I will eat that for every meal. When we start to get into the training of the Sullys to learn the way of water, I found it noteworthy how they made a point of showing how the girls, they get the hang of it. Part of that is because Kiri clearly has some sort of mystical thing going on with her not yet fully explained connection to Awa, but even Took, she's going with the flow. She figures it out. The boys, though, the men, they're struggling. So there is this gender divide that I've already mentioned about Jake's approach to parenting. This is when we get that double dose of baby girl where he's checking in on Kiri, seeing how she's doing, really trying to understand what she's struggling with when it comes to this connection to Awa. And we already know at this point that something's going on because the film makes a point of showing you that these bioluminescent fish are coming to her feet in the water, but they're not swarming Jake's feet, even though he's sitting right next to her. I know I can and will probably continue to joke about the whole baby girl thing.
I know, it's intimidating to fall for a girl with a strong pelvic floor.
But the nickname is actually very important to understanding the characters and the relationships, because while Jake is out here calling his daughter baby girl, his sons are always having to adhere to this rigid yes sir, no sir way of speaking during their interactions. We can see that Jake is more than capable of performing emotional labor, but he also has to unlearn this block he has that is stopping him from seeing how his sons are emotional beings who are in need of that emotional labor from him as a father, just as much as Jake Sully's wife and daughters do. Even in the relationship between Spider and his war criminal father that isn't really his father, that scene where they go climbing up to have the soldiers try to bond with those flying creatures, Spider more or less is challenging the Colonel's masculinity in order to goad him into doing things the hard way. Jake Sully did it the hard way? Well, then I want to do it without tranking this flying creature first. Little sidebar now, but one of the several big questions I had when watching Avatar: The Way of Water multiple times was, is James Cameron a middle child? Because this film is going to be the rallying cry for middle children everywhere, because the amount of material and development given to the middle children of the Sully family is so far above what the eldest son and the youngest daughter get to have in this film. I love that whole arc with Payakan. He's a real one, by the way, and his story, even though he's basically the Pandora version of a whale, still ends up being essential to understanding this thematic arc they've got going through the story. Jake packs up his family and runs them off to live among this sea clan, and he's avoiding the fight. Payakan is deemed an outcast for killing, even though all he did was rally and mobilize people to fight back against war criminals, aka the Sky People. Payakan did nothing wrong, but this sea clan, led by Cliff Curtis and Kate Winslet, they have this very specific idea that you're not supposed to kill. They're not naturally inclined as a people to start fighting. They believe that living peacefully is the way that life is supposed to be lived. And sure, that's very noble and admirable, but what all these major characters in this story have to learn is that the type of enemy they're up against cannot be ignored into stopping. They can't be reasoned with. You know what stops the most vicious, violent imperialists? Violence! You cannot stop war criminals without violence. They will not go quietly because you asked nicely, because you were diplomatic. That's the whole point of the movie. This type of enemy, the Sky People, and the ideology they represent in this story, there is only one way to stop them.
I know, we've got to do something about them, don't we?
Machine gunners. Spider begged them to stop multiple times, and Spider is white. He's genetically a sky person, and you know what? It didn't work. You know what stopped them? You blow their ships up. A bow and arrow, a spear, flying creatures with sharp teeth. Clearly, we need to start getting into the long final battle. But before we get into that, one final point to mention is that sequence where Kiri meets her mother through Ewa. That's clearly going to expand into some big developments in the next film or multiple films, I'm not sure. Even though there were many things that had some sort of resolution by the end of the film, this was a major spot that was unresolved. And this is one of the things that I'm most interested in seeing develop further in Avatar 3. I want to know what's going to come from the building blocks of her meeting her mother and asking who her father is only for her mother to get yanked away. Did Ewa do the yanking? James Cameron, I have questions. When is Avatar 3 coming out? That guy who does the hunting on the ship, when he said, "I've got quotas to meet," that is capitalist violence summed up so efficiently.
I've decided to scalp you.
In the first Avatar film, we had that sequence of the tree being bulldozed down, and it's such a powerful, well-done sequence, and it's so devastating. It's the most emotionally traumatic part of that first movie for me. And the fact that James Cameron completely outdid the emotional devastation of that with the whale hunting. I know it's not a whale, they're called something different in Pandora, but I've only seen the film twice so far, so just give me a few more rewatches to start fully absorbing all of the vernacular. The fact that James Cameron found a way to punch me in the heart even harder than the tree that was bulldozed in the first film, how very dare you, James Cameron. Now I'll be completely honest with all of you. I have every intention of rewatching this film multiple times at the cinema. But when it comes to the whale hunting scene, it's kind of a bit too much for me because I'm a big crybaby. So odds are, with all of the rewatches, I'm probably just going to have to close my eyes for that part.
Swing low, sweet chariot.
The fact that I could handle seeing the A24 horror film Men and the way that film ended and just laugh about how wild of a viewing experience that was, but I have to close my eyes because of how visceral the emotional devastation is when that whale is murdered. Oh, only James Cameron could do that. Can you tell James Cameron is a vegan?
No ritual animal slaughters of any kind.
But even with that commentary, you can also tell that he's not condemning indigenous cultures who do hunt in a way that's respectful of the process of transferring energy, of the give and take, the circle of life, whatever you would like to call it. Because after the whale dies, they have Spider say something like, "That's all you're taking? You're just going to throw the rest away?" Because if you were hunting in a more traditional indigenous way, my very limited understanding of it, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, is that a lot of that type of hunting is done in such a way that you make full use of what you hunt. You would use as much of that creature as possible. But these dirty sky people just want this one tiny vial from this massive creature because that's where the money is.
I'm so mad I could just spit.
And that's another thing that's so unique about James Cameron's Avatar films when you compare them to the sludge of most of these other action-heavy blockbusters. When, in any of those other movies, has a giant act of violence against nature been an emotional turning point and source of escalation in the overall narrative conflict? Violence is the answer when Mother Nature is on the line. James Cameron understands what righteous violence is, though. Do you all know about that story of James Cameron trying to beat Harvey Weinstein at the Oscars with his Titanic Oscar because of what Harvey Weinstein did to Guillermo del Toro? What do you remember from the night Titanic won the Oscars? I remember almost getting in a fight with Harvey Weinstein and hitting him with my Oscar. What were you and Harvey discussing that led to this altercation? It's kind of a long story, but it has to do with Guillermo del Toro and how badly he was dealt with by Miramax on Mimic. Harvey came up glad-handing me, talking about how great they were for the artist, and I just read him chapter and verse about how great I thought he was for the artist based on my friend's experience, and that led to an altercation. As if I didn't already like James Cameron enough for giving Guillermo del Toro $1 million to pay off a ransom when Guillermo del Toro's father was kidnapped, now I find out he almost beat up Harvey Weinstein with his Titanic Oscar. This is even better than all of those funny quotes that Ridley Scott was launching during his months of promoting The Last Duel and House of Gucci back-to-back. But speaking of evil, violent men, the Colonel and his gang of war criminals going and terrorizing the indigenous sea clans, I think a very important detail people need to take note of is that Spider begged him not to shoot that woman, and I feel it in my bones that if Spider had not been there, that woman would not have made it out of there alive. And in all likelihood, most of the people in that village would have died. This is not me saying that the Colonel is in any way redeemable or has any amount of potential to be redeemed, but these details of how that scene played out are very important for building up whatever type of tension is going to continue in the next film or multiple films, I don't know exactly, involving Spider and his lineage. Also, Rita, that gold goo from the Pandora whales, that's definitely going to stay in play. There's no way that's being introduced in this movie just to never be brought back into the dramatic conflicts of the Sky People trying to colonize Pandora. Anyway, back to this large final action sequence. It's been ignited by the determination of the youth to save nature, to save the environment, and I love that. But once they get taken captive, you saw what happened, right? These imperialist war criminals used children as the Pandora version of human shields. James Cameron, I see what you're doing. I see who you're calling out. Now, once that action got going, where the parents and the entire Sea Clan are riding into battle, a small detail that I really appreciated is that you see Jake Sully run out of bullets, and you see Neytiri retrieving arrows out of Sky People whom she's already shot. It adds a dimension of realism that a lot of other action blockbusters don't have. One character I haven't mentioned yet because he's not really that important to moving the story along is the marine biologist, but I do want to acknowledge how funny he was when he started talking smack against that whale hunter. They went full Moby Dick and had that hunter being this version of Captain Ahab, and he was humbled. He was reminded that he is nothing but an insignificant little speck of dust compared to the power of nature. And that marine biologist was the narrator of that scene, talking smack about who's got the harpoon now. It was very funny. Now, I'm not going to put that character on a pedestal. I'm not going to make him out to be something revolutionary. He absolutely is not. He was going along with all of that violence just for the money, for his research, completely hypocritical. At least Spider found his opportunity to snatch up a fire extinguisher and start swinging, smashing up the control panel so that the whole ship would crash. And I love that for him. He didn't do everything the way he should have during his journey as a character, but the Spider antis need to remember that he still had his moments. If we're giving characters their flowers, though, let's give it up for little baby Took. I can't lie, I laughed when she got recaptured and said, I can't believe I'm tied up again. But you know what? I respect the effort. When her brothers are in danger, she doesn't care that she's this tall because she's a child. She said, Sullies stick together, and she ran up on that ship. She was hissing, Little Took, you are the future. You are the reason Whitney Houston sang that song. Of course, like I guessed, we did end up getting a dead Sully, the firstborn, which was clearly coming because he had far less development in the story than the middle children. But then, when Jake had to rally the family to go get the girls back, when he said to Neytiri, I need you with me. I need you to be strong. That is what I want to see. Jake Sully doing emotional labor to get his wife battle ready. Ooh.
Daddy?
They get back to the ship, and it's there that we see more of a dynamic playing out that I haven't really touched on yet because this movie is over 3 hours long and there are more moving parts than I can fit into a video that is under an hour long. There is some very interesting tension being built between Spider and Neytiri. When Jake introduces us to his new expanded family, he talks about Spider being orphaned and being drawn to the Na'vi and their way of life and wanting to be part of the Sully family. But Jake also says that Neytiri felt that Spider did not belong with them. She said that he belongs with his own kind. That tension further builds when Spider and the other kids are first being taken captive in the forest when they encounter those war criminals for the first time, and he is able to spy on the video footage, Neytiri bow and arrowing the Colonel, and it seems like he had some conflicted feelings that he now needs to unpack about all of that. It's hard to get a clear read on Spider sometimes. You can see how horrified he is when the soldiers attack the Sea Clan, and he and the marine biologist are the only ones we see through the camera lens expressing any type of noticeable sorrow in their expressions over the whale hunting. But when the Sullys board that ship at the end to rescue the girls, Spider is hiding around a corner when Neytiri is destroying her opponents and doing it very well. And I don't fully know what to make of it. I'm not sure. I don't know if he maybe has internalized her wariness towards him that was already established earlier in the film. He knows that she doesn't see him as one of her children, even if the children accept him. The boys are calling him cuz. But that tension between them seems like it's far from resolved by the end of the movie. I think there's a lot more that's going to get dug into and explored with that relationship tension. Jake accepts Spider into the family at the end of the movie, but I have no doubt that Spider saving the Colonel is going to come back into play. The Sullys will find out, and there's going to be a massive fallout from that. We'll probably get a variety of reactions from the different members of the family. Neytiri will obviously be the one who takes it the worst, but his ongoing flirtation with Kitty is something that is way more significant than I would imagine the skeptics of James Cameron and of Avatar are probably realizing. When you have a filmmaker like James Cameron with this body of work that is as substantial in quality and quantity as it is, you can start to pick up on what has a recurring presence in the stories he tells. You look at Terminator, Titanic, and the first Avatar film. What do you have? Star-crossed lovers. James Cameron's filmography says that it's sexy for men to passionately care for the woman that they fall in love with and then die for them. It's in there in all three. Although Jake did get to come back to life. In Avatar: The Way of Water, that ship starts sinking and it becomes an unofficial Titanic sequel. And during this sequence where Spider and Cutie are still together, they're running all over the ship while it's sinking, helping each other, it was definitely giving me Jack and Rose vibes. Some sort of betrayal getting revealed, like Spider saving the Colonel. That's a perfect setup to make the movie go from being a James Cameron film to a Baz Luhrmann film. William Shakespeare has in fact been resurrected into Pandora. But following James Cameron's pattern, Spider is going to die. Now, it might not happen for a couple of films, but he's going to die at some point. Will it be permanent? Well, that remains to be seen. There might be the possibility of him getting his own Na'vi avatar, which will allow him to finally live the way he's always wanted to, if he has proven himself worthy of that. There's also that possibility of that golden goo, I think it's called Amrita, that might be in play with this particular story thread. But yeah, I firmly believe that Spider is going to die, and probably specifically to save Cutie. It could also be that he dies to save not just her, but the entire Sully family. I think we're going to really lean into that found family angle for this storyline as it develops further. Now listen, I love a good tragedy. Baz Luhrmann is my guy, and all he does is break my heart with tragic endings. All these Spider antis on the Bird app are talking trash about Spider when they need to develop a little bit more media literacy and see that James Cameron, the mastermind that he is about to put Spider in a position to follow in the footsteps of Kyle Reese, Jack Dawson, and Jake Sully. You need to get a reality check and see what's happening right in front of you. Jake Sully was not attractive to me in the first film because a reckless 20-something-year-old who is happily employed by the military-industrial complex, no thank you. Yuck.
That's gross.
But then, once he betrayed them, and he asked Awa for help, and she rallied the Na'vi troops to engage in asymmetric warfare against the Sky People, I thought, well, okay, maybe Jake Sully's all right. And now that he's a dad performing emotional labor, oh, yes, I'm here for all of that.
But she was having feelings she wasn't sure she should enjoy.
Spider right now is an immature, vulnerable child having to deal with being kidnapped by the zombie ghost of his birth father, but give it another decade and James Cameron is going to get all of you to change your mind. You dare doubt James Cameron's storytelling abilities? After all these decades, foolish. A few final things about Jake Sully. Him being on the verge of death and waking up and calling for his dead son only for it to be Loic. James Cameron personally hunted me down and punched me in the heart with that. How dare you? To go from that and their entire story across the film of Jake being too hard on him, both of his sons, but especially him, only for Loic to be the one to save him because he now understands the way of water, because he insisted on sticking to his principles and befriending Payakan, and Payakan pulling them to the surface, all that buildup for Jake to finally tell his son, I see you. James Cameron! The ugly crying I was doing, it was too much. Far too much. I thought I was messy for crying every time I saw Baz Luhrmann's Elvis and Priscilla left, but then here we are. More ugly crying. Oh my God. But the ending being Jake Sully saying, I see now, I can't save my family by running. Jake Sully finally realizing that violence is the answer. This was what I waited 3 hours for.
Holy Christ, now I'm pissed!
I don't have enough words to effectively express how hyped I am for Avatar 3. Jake Sully has been running from the fight for over 3 hours. No, sir. Arm yourself. Your enemy will not be reasoned with, and they will not go quietly, so you need to handle it. You need to protect your family, protect the planet, protect your people. The entire environment is at stake. This was completely worth the wait. James Cameron is a master of his craft. This video was ridiculously long, and yet there was plenty more I could have said. So, by all means, sound off in the comments section. Let's get into all of the details of this 3+ hour masterpiece. All of the theories and speculation of what's coming next, because even some of the mutuals I have on social media that I thought for sure would have already seen the way of water have not. There's no time to waste. Let's get on with it. See you in the next one. Bye.